Welcome to your A-Level English Language induction session. Sorry we can't be seeing you in person as we normally would at this time of year, but we've put together some information for you just to make sure that you are ready and you know what to expect in September. With English language, you need to be prepared to learn completely different things to those that you did for GCSE. One of the main differences you'll notice is the wide variety of texts that we study and how different they are to perhaps, say, the newspaper articles or the poems or the extracts from texts that you have looked at already. For example, you may well tackle something like this. Looks really small, looks quite insignificant, but loads of really interesting language choices being used in the text here. So for example, we could talk about the layout of the text, the fact that obviously it's giving an instruction, so it's written in a very specific way, sequential. We're at step 6 at this point. You've got the different colours being used and bold text to help emphasise certain areas. And then if we look at some of the linguistic choices ourselves, we've got lots of modification. So we've got spiced Moroccan to modify the word soup. We've got lots of imperative verbs, as you'd expect from an instructional text. So things like serve and dollop, finish and add. And then we've got some quite informal choices if we're thinking about audience. So words like dollop obviously are quite informal. Even sprinkle, and also then an extra kick. So this text very much comes across from the perspective that it might have been said by someone perhaps like Jamie Oliver. Other texts that you'll be faced with will be spoken language texts that can appear in a variety of formats. So you may well find a full transcript, which might look a little bit like a script. It's probably the closest type of text that you would have looked at before, or you'll get an extract like the one that I've just put on the screen. So we've got one here which is a transcription of a radio commentary on a football match. So again, completely different audience, very different purpose, a small amount of text, but lots of rich ideas that we could look at here. So obviously we've got the adverb beautifully, which is not necessarily a phrase you would stereotypically associate with a description of a movement like that, controlling the ball. We've got lots of violent verbs being used in this extract as well. So we've got beats and whips. We've got the idea of the phrase gets on the end of it. So there's a big assumption here that the audience, so the person listening to this radio broadcast, will be familiar with the terminology associated with football. For again, words like central defender, we've got team, and we've got the face of the goal. Again, so what we would call then obviously field-specific lexis, so language associated with a specific field, and in this case that is football. So again, lots of interesting things we could pick out with that one. Another area that we have the chance to discuss and debate and write about in English language is opinions about language. So the last text that's appeared on the screen there is an example of the type of article that we might look at for inspiration, basically because you'll be writing your own opinion pieces on aspects relating to language, and what better than focusing on slang. Language divides people. Some people feel that it's in decline, some people feel that it's evolving, so there's kind of two schools of thought with that. So it'd be interesting to see where you fit on that spectrum, and what you think about other people's opinions about language. Like many of your A-levels, English language is split into 3 areas. So we've got 2 papers, exam papers, both of equal lengths and both of equal weightings in terms of their percentage of value to the A-level. And then we have our NEA, our non-exam assessment, which is 20% of the final A-level mark. So your first paper, which is the kind of the area that we'll start to look at to begin with, is titled Language, the Individual and Society, and it's split into 2 sections. So we'll be looking at how texts vary, but also how texts construct meaning and how they construct representation of different issues, events, topics, people, subjects. Okay, you'll be analysing 2 texts, and then you make a comparison of those 2 texts. So one text is a contemporary text and one text is an older text. In the second section of the first paper, is where we tackle our child language development topic, which we don't actually start studying until year 13, but that does come through in that first paper. So we study how children progress in terms of literacy, in terms of speaking, in terms of writing, and in terms of reading. So then we look at different attitudes and kind of suggestions and theories about that, and then you get to choose out of 2 questions to answer on that topic. Your second paper covers the topics of language diversity and change, and in section A you get a choice of topics. So you can either write an evaluative essay about language change, or you can choose a topic to do with language diversity. And the language diversity topics are accent and dialect, social groups, occupation and gender. Okay, and we'll be covering those during year 12. In the second section, which is called language discourses, you'll be analysing how other writers use language to present their ideas and attitudes and opinions. So we might be presented with an opinion piece about gender, for example, and you have to analyse how the writer's using language to construct that opinion. And the second section of that paper, section B, you actually get the chance to write your own opinion piece, as I referred to earlier on. So it will be the topic from the first section that you'll be asked to write on, but obviously sharing your own opinions and ideas about it based on the research and the study that we've done. The coursework topics, or what is called non-exam assessment, are really exciting. You have the opportunity to produce 2 pieces, very different pieces. So one is a language investigation, where you will write 2,000 words and you choose the area that you're interested in investigating. So this is, you know, if you think about science investigations, you'll have a question or a statement, perhaps a hypothesis, you'll write a methodology, so how are you going to find an answer to that question, you collect your data, you analyse your data, and then you write it all up in a longer piece. So this is what the Year 12s are currently working on, and some of the topics they've chosen are very inspired by the times, but we've got some really interesting ones, such as looking at comparing how different politicians have spoken on the current COVID-19 situation. We've got a student looking at sexist language in sports reporting, so comparing some commentaries for male sports and female sports. And then we've got one where students are looking at how people speak to their pets, so the kind of how they change their language in lots of different ways for that. So really exciting, very diverse. But not only that, you get the opportunity to complete some creative writing as well, which we call original writing. So it's a slightly shorter piece, and you write a commentary of that as well. So it's 1,500 words in total, and it needs to fit into one of the following topics. So you're either writing an information text, a persuasive text, or some kind of fiction or storytelling. So the parts of the course that you'll be doing in Year 12, so with me at Teacher 1, Miss Webb, for those of you who've not met me before, you will do an introduction to language analysis, because you may feel that it's something you can do already, having studied GCSE, but believe me, this is very different, as you've probably guessed already. So we start off with that to make sure that you've got the tools, the language that you need, the terminology in order to succeed. Then we will move on to look at regional variation, so that includes accents and dialects and how different parts and areas of the UK speak differently. We've got then language and social groups, so we'll look at perhaps the influence of gender, age, ethnicity, class, and how those things impact the language that people use as well. We then go back to a bit of a language analysis in order to help us prepare for the Year 12 exam, and then we make a start on one of the topics for the coursework, so language in action, original writing. Teacher 2, who from September will be Mrs Mansfield, for those of you that know her, again we'll start out with some introductory work to give you the stepping stones that you need. And then the other option topics from paper 2, which are language and gender and language and occupation. Okay, and then back to paper 1, language analysis, at the same time that you'll be doing that with me, but obviously looking at very different types of texts. And then the second part of the coursework you will begin with Mrs. Mansfield in the summer term. Okay, now it might be that I actually end up teaching you language and gender, and Mrs. Mansfield does regional variation. We haven't quite divided it up between us yet, but this is how we cover those topics. So regardless of who does what, this is the stuff that you will be doing in Year 12. Now, you've been set plenty of activities to keep you busy since the start of lockdown, so just hopefully you're getting on okay with those. So there were a few on hopefully getting you to think about English in a different way to the ways that you're already used to. So we had activities on formality, we had some kind of key definitions of terms that you're going to be learning and using in English language study. There was some work on obviously different categories of nouns, looking at texts to extract and identify different parts of speech and sentence types. We started to think about sound, okay, so phonology. You'll notice here, or you will once we get going in September, that I'm taking you through all of the different language levels. Then there was an activity on graphology, okay, obviously, which is the design and layout of a text. And then there was some related concept revision, research, that you had to do for task 8. Okay, and then task 9 was all about opinions. So remember, lots of this course is not just about analysing language, but it's having an opinion about how language is used, but also understanding other people's opinions and attitudes to language. And then obviously we set some additional preparation work where I got you to consider some new words. These are appearing all the time in our language, especially words such as lockdown, which obviously isn't a new word necessarily, but has obviously come into use much more regularly over the last few months. So it's really interesting because language is always evolving, the course always changes, the texts that we look at change, because there are new things coming out on a daily basis. So thinking about what else you could be doing to prepare for the course, a little bit of shopping, hopefully safe shopping, but if you could get yourself, make sure you've got a ring binder and some dividers. I would advise getting a lever arch file because you'll have lots of notes and handouts, and then you can obviously use the dividers to organise them by teacher, and then as we progress further through we can organise those by section. And I'm making a suggestion about a few wider reading activities that you can do. And one of the easiest things is really just to stay up to date with news about language, issues about language, and any debates that might be ongoing. And I've put a couple of links on here that you can have a little look at. Again, there's all sorts of articles in newspapers. It doesn't just have to be The Guardian. That happens to be one that I'd used as an example last year. If any of you are on Twitter, we will be setting up our own A-level language blog, but there are lots of other people doing that as well, so feel free to have a look at some of those. One of the easiest thing to do, as you've seen from the beginning, the texts that we study in A-level language are very different and diverse, okay? So you can collect your own texts. You know, it might be a leaflet that comes through the door from a fast food restaurant, okay? It might be a snippet of a recording of something that you've jotted down a transcription for. Remember that all texts are valid objects of study, okay? And the wider range of texts you look at, the better prepared you'll be for September. So I've put my email address at the bottom as well, so if you have got any questions or any concerns, or if you want me to look at anything that you've done so far, feel free to get in touch, and I look forward to meeting you in the start of the new term.